We are back on Morning Line. Professor Mark Schwartz with us from Lipscomb University. Good to have him on. As we're talking this morning, you see Middle East tensions or some of the lessening of the tensions, we hope, after a lot's been going on. All right, so we take out that general.
Right.
Is there someone else going to step into the void?
Well, I mean, certainly they have a chain of command where someone is going to be advanced to that position. But Soleimani was in charge of that aspect of Iranian foreign policy for a really long time. So he is maybe not the indispensable man, but not every leader is going to be created equal. So the person who comes in there may not be as capable. Soleimani may have, through his reputation, gotten a longer leash in order to make his own decisions. So he had maybe a lot more freedom of decision and freedom of movement. So the new person may be under a lot more restrictions, and also that person is probably going to think, I don't want to be the next victim.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I mean, if I'm next in line, I'm like, I don't know if I want this.
Yeah.
It makes you one of the most wanted men on the planet.
It's kind of like being the drummer for I forgot what
any number of bands.
Well, that band where the guy kept blowing up. I can't remember what that documentary was.
Spinal Tap.
Spinal Tap.
Yes, I love that movie. Hey, we've got Joe on line one. Joe, good morning. Hi, Joe.
Good morning, Nick.
Hey.
Just a few comments. I know the professor probably knows this, but Americans seem to have a very short memory about what's happened in the past. It's been a few years ago that you had an Iraq-Iran war. Well, guess who we backed? We backed Iraq. And they give them equipment and stuff to use, and their war didn't last but a few days. And but now here we are, still in Iraq, and those people over there wanting, Americans to get out of Iraq. So, this is an ongoing situation that just keeps festering. It's like Afghanistan. The Russians fought in Afghanistan for about 8 years, and we backed the rebels, or whatever you want to call them. They went by several different names. We give them missiles and equipment and arms and everything. And then the Russians said, well, it's not such a good idea. We're just losing a bunch of people and a bunch of equipment, so they just pulled out and went home. Well, guess what? We go over there, we get over and start fighting, and they're shooting our soldiers with the same stuff that we gave them when they was fighting the Russians. So the bottom line to all this is kind of a religious wars, because all these countries are Muslims. So they hate Americans and hate Christians.
Yeah, well, I mean, all right, whether they want us there or not, didn't the Iraqi parliament, legislature, whatever it's called there, vote to say, look, we want the U.S. forces out of the country? Right. Just yesterday, the day before.
Well, the thing is, with the Iraqi legislature, excuse me, the ones who voted were those who are Shiite. Okay, there's three major groups within Iran. There are the Kurdish Arabs, who are Sunni. There are the not Kurdish Arabs, Kurdish Sunnis. There are the Arab Sunnis, and then there are the Arab Shiites. Okay?
And it's just they have a different.
Well, Arab Shiites make up a majority of the country, so they actually control a democratic government because they have the numbers. The Kurds and the Sunni Arabs boycotted that vote. Okay, there's a substantial portion of the population that supports American presence there because they're afraid of what would happen if the Americans left. Then there's also a mixed message among the Shiites themselves that some of them welcome the support from Iran, but they don't want to be controlled by Iran. They want to run, because they're Iraqi, they want to run their own country. And also there's always a little bit of tension between Arabs and Persians, because Iranians are actually different ethnically from Arabs.
All right, so what do you think? Will the troops stay in Iraq?
I think that you've got a president who wants to get out of Iraq. You've got an American population like this gentleman who says wants to get out of Iraq because we see it as kind of pointless. I think we maintain some measure of presence there, but for the most part, I think we do leave.
Oh, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, the president, you're right, has said he wants to get them, but the numbers actually are as much, if not more, than they were when he took office.
Yeah, by a little bit.
And I'm not saying that's his fault. It's just, you know, I mean, it's that it's more so.
Right.
It just seems like a sticky wicket to get out of.
It is a sticky wicket, and so that's why you enter into negotiations with Iran to negotiate a stable situation so that you can leave and not have to come back.
Okay.
That it doesn't become necessary for the United States to be there for there to be a stable Middle East.
All right. Now, I see that in the aftermath, there was a briefing on the attack yesterday for lawmakers in Capitol Hill. And there was some bipartisan objections saying that it was the worst military briefing they've ever seen because there was nothing in there you couldn't read in USA Today, and they just didn't share much. And I'm wondering from your perspective, you know, what needs to be shared? I think the American public likes to know to some degree. I mean, I think the president and his staff may say, look, we didn't want to let people in because we wanted this to be a secret attack, and I can see some of that, but, you know, confidential information is shared. Where does it come down as to how free, you know, the president should be about going and doing things without maybe letting members of Congress at least be aware of it?
Well, that's a very difficult question. It's a complex question because there are so many things that it can impact other things. Okay, so if I give you a piece of information and you're a member of Congress, as if I'm an member of the intelligence community or Defense Department, there's a possibility that the information that I give you can make it a connection to something else that might expose something that you don't want exposed, like a source, like a piece of technology that you may not want to expose the capability of, or something like that.
Right.
So that's always been part of that sharing process with Congress. Also, you have to, in the last 3 years, Washington leaks like a sieve.
I know, so that's the concern.
And
it's just
that is why, you know, the White House is maybe, you could argue they've overcompensated for that, but there's also 2 or 3 different levels of sharing. Okay, you've got your gang of 8, which are the leadership of the House and the Senate, who are roped into things like this. Yesterday was a little bit different. Those were the full committees that would have been in on this. So you're going to probably share things with Nancy Pelosi before you would the entire committee, and because you feel like you can depend on her. She's in a position of responsibility. She's not going to be as cavalier, perhaps, about sharing things. Individual members of Congress, there's so many different people with so many different agendas and things like that, and levels of trustworthiness, to be honest.
Okay, so that comes into play. Let's go to Jack. Jack, good morning.
Good morning.
Hey, Jack, go ahead.
I'd like to second Joe's point of view that our short-term memory problem, meaning the last 50 years, shall we say, is a very serious deficit and a handicap that most of our fellow citizens suffer from. I am not a supporter in any way, shape, or form of the government of Iran. Nonetheless, if you look at the history, not only did we support Iraq in the Iraq-Iran war, but we overthrew the Iranian government that was democratically elected in the 1950s. That's how this all started. And people tend to forget we have a bad habit of overthrowing other people's democratically elected governments, which would seem to fly in the face of our alleged values. So you start with that. We installed the Shah of Iran, the king, shall we say. We, meaning the CIA, trained and supported his secret police, the Savak. When that government was overthrown by the Iranian people, we ended up with the Islamic Republic of Iran. Fast forward to literally the day after, more or less, Donald Trump is elected. We have a stable relationship relative to the nuclear issue with Iran. He pulls out. Then he declares economic war against Iran. An economic blockade is under, for many hundreds of years, if not longer, an act of war. We started a war with Iran. And we decide to strangle them economically. I might add, this is the same thing that we're doing to Venezuela. So, you know, again, I'm not a supporter of Iran, but America's bad behavior and violation, again, of its alleged values and principles is something, personally, as a third-generation veteran, that drives me absolutely crazy. We seem to have no regard for any other peoples on this planet unless they have adequate military force to essentially enforce their own choices and destiny. And just to go for the bonus round very quickly, the reason that hundreds of thousands of Hondurans showed up at our border last year, in part, was because we overthrew the government of Honduras. And that was in 2009. And the guy that we installed there, his brother was convicted for massive cocaine smuggling in federal court in New York last year. The president was an unindicted co-conspirator. So, you know, our behavior and our choices of allies and the language that we use and the behavior that we display, to me, personally, is a disgrace. And it has been a disgrace for many, many, many years.
Thank you. Jack's interesting. And you know, it's very refreshing hearing from him, a veteran, as he says, and his perspective on it. And yeah, there's a lot of truth, I think, in what he says. But what your take on this?
I mean, there's a lot of, yeah, I mean, he wasn't inaccurate about his facts or anything like that. Does it tell the whole story? I would probably push back a little bit on how much of a legacy that there is of the original CIA overthrow of Mohammad Mossadegh in 1953, I think it was, in Iran. That puts the Shah in place. But the Shah had some popularity. Certainly he was repressive. He was not a democratically elected leader or anything like that. Yes, we did train the Savak and all that. But when it comes to what happens in 1979 with the revolution, we are partially being brought into something where, okay, we're being blamed for a lot of the things that happened under that regime. You know, we have to do some things that are in our interest.
We do a lot of things in our interest.
And it's sometimes it's down and dirty. Sometimes it's going to be something that has blowback to us a generation later. I do wonder sometimes about, okay, how far back do you go in order to say, well, that's what's driving the events of today? There's a mixture of those things. I mean, the leader of Iran now, Ali Khamenei, is old enough to have lived through the original revolution in 1979, the regime of the Shah and all that kind of thing. So he has a long memory. But now he's had 40 years to move beyond that. I mean, do they have any responsibility to kind of be able to move beyond things? A lot of this is just typical power politics. It's really hard to put a label of right and wrong on either side. Okay, we've done some things that probably made things worse. Right now, what probably President Trump is trying to do is say, you know what, I'm going to forget about the past. I'm going to try to set the stage for what can we do to move forward. Because the status quo was unacceptable in terms of can we improve on that and actually make for a stable Middle East.
All right, as far as what do you think his beef, and we've heard this, the president saying he did not like the nuclear deal. All right, I mean, and that's any type of deal. I mean, you want to have it try to be verified. I mean, but I mean, what's interesting to me is he's not real happy with this Iranian nuclear deal, and he may have some points there, and yet he's ready to trust that buffoon in North Carolina. Or, what am I saying, North Carolina? That buffoon in North Korea. I mean, he's prepared to trust that buffoon, which is exactly what he is, and that guy is not as trustworthy as anyone, and yet, oh, he's going to cut down his weapons. We've never seen any of that. It's like, how can you know, he may be right about Iran, but you think you're going to trust that clown?
Well, the thing is, of course, trust but verify would be the mantra of anybody who's trying to make these kinds of things. They're two different situations.
Well, I mean, you're still talking about
and so you can treat them differently, and so with Kim Jong-un, again, I don't know if this is going to work out that way or not, but Kim Jong-un threatened over the holidays to give us a really big surprise, and he did not. He hasn't launched the missiles. He hasn't been as confrontational since Trump took over. That is kind of de-escalated to some extent, okay? The Iran situation, we talked about, you know, escalation. Well, us finally doing something, is that really escalation when it actually brought things back down to a lesser level of confrontation. See, I don't really see us responding as always an escalation.
Okay, I guess
that's a rhetorical point as opposed to maybe a factual one.
Well, let's talk about them.
Rhetoric is important in this.
We'll take a break. When we come back, we'll take more calls and we'll talk about where we go from here then, all right? Because, yeah, all right, so you're going back on this, getting rid of these deals, whatever the case is, but where do we go from here? All right, so we'll talk about that, take more of your calls right after this. Stay with us.